3.3 Bullying. Another aspect of Magic Science Man is that he is a cold calculator of emotional maturity. One measure to test this is with bullying, as bullying encapsulates in a single measure a lack of emotional maturity and pettiness. On these measures, academics do come off fairly well, but not the best, and they are certainly not free of the psychological traits that lead to bullying, which intuitively seems to be related to bias. Now, there are a lot of studies on the prevalence of bullying in academia. Unfortunately, their definitions and methods vary wildly, as do their timescales, and it doesn't tell us how bullying among academics compares to bullying among the general population. The paper, Faculty Experiences with Bullying in Higher Education, looks at 11 studies on the matter, and the average reported rate of having been bullied was 32.83%. However, both the definitions and timescales varied with each study, and there is no private sector population to compare them to. The book Bullying and Harassment in the Workplace has a table of 124 studies on workplace bullying prevalence among various organizations and populations, but the authors also coded the definitions of bullying used. Here is what their table looked like. Going through this, we found 6 studies on bullying from this table which looked at an academic population for which also existed at least one other study on bullying outside of academia using the same definition. So we have a few apples to apples comparisons. The 1B plus 3A definitions. The 3B definition studies. The 1A plus 4 definition studies. The 1B definition studies. And the definition 4 studies. Research Institute employees came in at 16th out of 21 for the 1B plus 3A definition studies. Students at the Danish Royal School of Educational Studies came in 5th out of 21. So, in terms of their combined rank, they rank at 10.5, or precisely average in terms of rank order. The average for the whole of the 1B plus 3A definition studies was 8.76%, whereas the 2 academic studies were 4.4% and 14%, averaging 9.2%. Now, perhaps you don't think the bullying rate of students should reflect academics, and Research Institute employees are the only ones that really matter, because these are the people actually writing the studies. But given the imprecision of the data, any data on tangentially academic fields should be considered in a holistic sense. But if you think not, that's fine. The Research Institute employees still finished 16th, not 21st, on bullying rate, and their rate was 4.4%, not 0%. And it was higher than bank inspectors, sawmill workers, steel workers, and a general sample of employed persons in Sweden. Since the point of this is to not just say, but really show and drive home that academics are not wizards, so long as the point that they are not wizards is taken away, that's fine. The 3B definition studies showed university employees having much lower bullying rates, but this was only compared to NHS workers at 38% and employees working with disabled people at 19%. It's difficult to argue much of anything can be drawn from the 3B definition studies comparison. In the 1A plus 4 definition studies, we have some gold. A single researcher using the same definition and survey questions across multiple industries with the data presented in the same study. Einarsson 1996. This showed university workers coming out a little better than average in terms of bullying rates. They finished 9th, 10th out of 12 in rank order, just above teachers' unions and industrial workers, and just behind trade and commerce at 2.4%. The average for the 12 Einarsson samples was 4.38%, but this average was dragged up by health and welfare managers and the Psychologists' Union, who may be reporting high results because, as psychologists, they might look for and be more sensitive to bullying and find false positives, similar to how psychology students are more likely to think that they have mental health problems. The median of the Einarsson studies is 3.6%, so again we see university employees being on the low end of bullying, but not at the bottom, and having a rate very close to industrial workers, trade and commerce, and the electricians' union. The 1B definition studies don't have enough meaningful comparisons to be drawn. The definition 4 studies, which is on university employees in Spain, has a rather eye-poppingly high result. Out of the 14 definition 4 studies, they rank the third highest. Of course, university employees could include janitors, groundskeepers, etc., but even so, based on the data of industrial workers, blue-collar workers tend to have rather low bullying rates, and so do academics in all honesty. It's just one study. Maybe it's a situation particular to Spain as a country, or that university in particular. The paper Destructive Conflict and Bullying at Work by Hole and Cooper also looked at bullying rates across industries, using the same definition and questions across industries in the United Kingdom. So, like Einarsson 1996, this is apples to apples gold. Table 4. Current, past and indirect bullying. Hole and Cooper found higher education at 7.2% of the respondents in higher education saying they have been bullied, by their definition of bullying, in the past 6 months. The unweighted average of all of these categories is 11.05%. Hole and Cooper may have done an N-weighted average, which seems inappropriate for this topic, given that N-weighting doesn't necessarily reflect the employment distribution of the general population. Either way, you see once again universities being on the low end for bullying rate, but not at the very bottom, edged out by manufacturing and just between retailing and the hotel industry. What is the purpose of this data on bullying? Is it because we care a lot about bullying in particular? Well, obviously we are against it, as are most people, but the point is to say that academics are not immune to human foibles. They are lower, no doubt, but they are not so low that you can say they are immune from base and petty impulses. Now, in theory, in the absence of any evidence on the matter, you shouldn't assume they are any more or less biased than the general population. But in practice we deal with the problem of Magic Science Man, where Magic Science Man casts a spell proclaiming, for example, there are no innate sex differences in personality, and then the wizard cultists just believe it. And then if you try to argue against the wizard cultists against this, they will be impervious to reason. If they can't argue against you, they will appeal to the authority of the wizards who know the ways of the world and aren't biased. The point of this was to show that wizards don't exist, or at least they don't exist as a class, i.e. the certification of being a wizard doesn't make you a wizard. 3.4. On psychology. Before going further into critiques of the capabilities of academics in general, we should talk about psychology. Because many of these analyses of academic competence involve psychologists, and the viewer may be tempted to hand-wave away such information by imagining it to be some problem specific to psychology. While there is no singular indicator of a field's rigor, one indicator we can look at is statistical power and replication rate. Statistical power is the probability that a statistical test will reject a false null hypothesis, which means that it won't fail to find a significant effect when one exists in reality. It's a quantifiable way to tell if a study is even capable of finding a positive effect and rejecting the null hypothesis. And there have been multiple field-wide meta-analyses of either randomized or most commonly cited studies in various fields, and the statistical power for those fields. Sean Last collected several of these studies, and looked at the statistical power for each field on the basis of these studies. Now, the general findings here are quite shocking. Of the fields and analyses Sean found, Only intelligence and intelligence group differences, subsets of psychology, have anything around 50% statistical power. And this point will be important later when we start talking about group differences in intelligence. But for now, the important point is that psychology is not a particularly weak field in terms of statistical power. We can also look at replication rates. In July 2016, Nature did a survey of 1,576 of various fields and asked what percentage of finds they believed could be replicated. These were the results. In 2015, the Open Science Collaboration Project took 100 psychology experiments and attempted replications, and were only able to replicate 47 of them, or 47%. This was then used as a ringing condemnation of psychology in particular. But this is not much lower than the replication rates researchers think their fields would have in what the public might consider to be hard sciences. LAST also collected a series of replication analyses of various fields, not surveys. Different types of psychology are broken down on this list. Most relevant for this course, in particular, is differential psychology, which deals with how people differ in all manner of psychological traits. In this light, psychology in general does not appear to be particularly bad. Moreover, given the greater ambiguity of psychology and the greater difficulty in operationalizing psychological experiments than, say, a physics experiment, the fact that psychology has a lower replication rate than biology, which isn't to our knowledge even established, wouldn't necessarily mean psychologists are less statistically literate than biologists. It could just reflect the more ambiguous nature of the subject matter. The reason for this defense is because several of the studies we will be presenting on general statistics knowledge focus on psychologists, and we are cutting the escape rope of "this only applies to psychologists," when there is no reason to presume other fields are better.